My ex-husband brought his new wife to my restaurant. She didn't know I was the owner. What if you could confront your past and the man who shattered you without saying a word? Hey, my name is Marie. I never thought I'd feel so small in a place that was mine. The restaurant was buzzing that evening. The clink of glasses and soft hum of conversation filling the air like a familiar melody. I stood behind the counter, wiping down a glass that didn't need wiping. Watching the glow of candlelight flicker across the tables I'd spent years perfecting. This was my place, Marie's Bistro, my sanctuary, my proof that I could rebuild after everything fell apart. But then he walked in, arm in arm with her, and the world I'd built seemed to tilt on its axis. Daniel, my ex-husband, hadn't set foot in here since the divorce. 3 years had passed since I'd signed those papers, my hands trembling as I let go of a decade of promises. I'd poured every ounce of myself into this restaurant, turning heartbreak into something tangible, a place where people came to laugh, to celebrate, to feel alive. And yet, there he was, striding through the door with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a thing. His new wife clinging to his arm, her laughter cutting through the din like a blade. She didn't know. That was the worst part. She didn't know I was the owner, the one who'd designed every inch of this space. From the reclaimed wood tables to the handwritten specials board. She didn't know that the woman she'd just smiled at, the one in the crisp white apron, blending into the background, was the same woman who'd once shared Daniel's bed, his dreams, his life. I felt invisible, and not the kind of invisible that comes with peace. This was the kind that burns, the kind that makes your chest tighten and your throat ache with words you can't say. I watched them take a seat near the window. The best table in the house. Of course, Daniel would choose it. He always had a knack for claiming what wasn't his. I could still hear his voice from years ago, promising me forever while his eyes wandered elsewhere. I'd spent so long trying to forget that voice, those promises, but here they were, resurrected in the form of his easy smile and her oblivious giggles. The other diners didn't notice the shift in the air, but to me, it was suffocating. I could have stayed behind the counter. Let one of the servers handle their table, and pretended I didn't see them. That's what I'd done for years of ignored, buried the pain. But something in me stirred, a flicker of defiance I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't the same Marie who'd cried herself to sleep after he left. I'd built this restaurant from nothing, turned my grief into something beautiful. Why should I hide in my own space? And yet, as I stood there, my hands gripping the edge of the counter, I felt the weight of every choice I'd made since the divorce. The late nights working, the sacrifices, the moments I'd pushed people away because I was too scared to be hurt again. I'd thought I was stronger now, but seeing them together, seeing her in a role that used to be mine, made me question everything. Was I still letting him define me? Was I still the woman who'd let his betrayal shatter her? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The restaurant was still mine, and so was my story. I could let this moment break me, or I could choose to face it. I didn't know what I'd do next, whether I'd walk over to their table, smile politely, and pretend it didn't hurt, or whether I'd do something bolder, something that would reclaim the power he'd taken from me all those years ago. All I knew was that this moment, this humiliating, heart-wrenching moment, was the start of something new. I couldn't stop watching them. Daniel's hand rested casually on hers, his thumb brushing her knuckles in a way that felt like a memory I'd tried to erase. The restaurant hummed around me, oblivious to the storm in my chest, but every laugh from their table felt like a needle pricking an old wound. I should have looked away, should have busied myself with the evening rush, but my eyes kept drifting back. It wasn't just the sight of them together, it was the way the past seemed to creep up behind me, whispering all the betrayals I'd buried. I thought I'd moved on. 3 years of building Marie's Bistro, of pouring my soul into every recipe, every table setting, every smile for a customer. I'd convinced myself I was whole again. But seeing Daniel with her, this woman who wore a ring where mine used to be, brought back the smaller moments, the ones I'd tried to forget, the late nights he'd come home smelling of someone else's perfume, the way he'd dismiss my dreams of opening a restaurant, calling it a cute hobby while he chased his own ambitions. The phone calls he'd take in the other room, his voice low and secretive, while I pretended not to notice. Those weren't the big betrayals. The ones that made it into the divorce papers. They were the quiet ones. The ones that chipped away at me until I barely recognized myself. I remembered the time I found a receipt for a dinner I hadn't been invited to, tucked in his jacket pocket. I'd confronted him, my voice shaking, and he'd laughed it off, saying I was overreacting. I believed him then, because I wanted to. I wanted to believe the man I loved wouldn't hurt me. But those moments, those small, hidden betrayals left scars, deeper than I'd admitted. They were the reason I'd stopped trusting, not just him, but myself. Now, standing in my restaurant, I felt those scars ache. I wondered if she knew that side of him. Did she know the way he could make you feel like you were everything one day, and nothing the next? Did she know how he'd rewrite the truth to suit himself, leaving you questioning your own reality? I wanted to warn her, to walk over and spill every truth I'd learned the hard way, but what good would that do? She looked at him like he was her world, the same way I had. And I knew, deep down, that no warning would have stopped me back then. I forced myself to move, to check on a table across the room, to smile and ask if the food was to their liking. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying the years I'd spent rebuilding. After the divorce, I'd thrown myself into this restaurant, not just to survive, but to prove I could create something without him. Every success, every glowing review, every packed night felt like a victory. But tonight, with them sitting there, it didn't feel like enough. It felt like I was still running from the pain, still trying to outpace the shame of being the woman he'd left behind. I caught my reflection in the glass behind the bar, dark curls pulled back, apron tied neatly, eyes tired but sharp. I didn't look like the broken woman I'd been 3 years ago. I'd built this life, this place, from nothing. So why did their presence make me feel like I was still that woman, crying in the dark, wondering what I'd done wrong? The answer was buried somewhere in those hidden betrayals. In the scars I hadn't let myself feel until now. I didn't know if I could face those wounds. Not tonight, maybe not ever. But as I watched Daniel laugh, oblivious to my presence, I felt a spark of something new, not just anger, but resolve. I'd spent too long letting those scars define me in secret. Maybe it was time to confront them, to dig into the pain and see what it had to teach me. Could I face those hidden wounds, or would they stay buried forever? The air in the restaurant felt heavier now, as if Daniel's presence had thickened it, making every breath a conscious effort. I moved through the motions, checking orders, nodding to customers, refilling a water pitcher, but my mind was a battlefield. Every glance toward their table by the window stoked that spark of resolve I'd felt earlier, turning it into something fiercer, something I couldn't ignore. I was done hiding in my own space, done letting the ghost of our past dictate how I carried myself. Tonight, in my restaurant, I was going to take control. I'd spent 3 years building Marie's Bistro into more than just a business. It was my refuge, my proof that I could rise from the ashes of his betrayal. But seeing Daniel here, laughing with his new wife like he hadn't shattered me, made me realize I'd been running from something deeper. I wasn't just avoiding him. I was avoiding the part of me that still felt small, unworthy, discarded. That ended now. I wasn't the same Marie who'd let him walk away without a fight. I'd built this life without him. And I wasn't going to let him waltz in and make me feel like less. I slipped into the back office, closing the door just enough to muffle the restaurant's hum. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from the rush of clarity that hit me. For years, I'd told myself I was fine, that the divorce was behind me, that I'd moved on. But the truth was, I'd been surviving, not thriving. I'd been letting the pain linger, letting it shape my choices, why I worked late instead of dating, why I kept my heart locked away. Seeing them together tonight wasn't just a reminder of his betrayal. It was a mirror showing me how much I'd let it hold me back. I sat at my desk, staring at the framed photo of the restaurant's opening night. I was smiling in it, surrounded by friends, my eyes bright with hope. That woman, she wasn't afraid. She didn't let fear stop her from chasing a dream. I needed to be her again. I needed to stop being the woman who shrank at the sight of her ex-husband, and start being the one who'd built this place from nothing. But how? I couldn't just walk up to their table and demand, what, an apology, acknowledgement? No, it had to be bigger than that. It had to be about me, not him. I grabbed a notepad and started jotting down ideas, my pen moving faster than my thoughts could keep up. I could approach their table myself, serve them with a smile that said I was untouchable. I could make sure the entire staff treated their table with impeccable service, a subtle flex of the control I had here. Or maybe I could do something bolder, something that would show Daniel, and maybe even myself, that I wasn't invisible anymore. The ideas felt wild, reckless even, but they were proof that I was done being passive. I was done letting his presence steal my power. I stood up, smoothing my apron, and caught my reflection in the small mirror by the door. My eyes weren't tired anymore, they were alive. burning with something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. I didn't know exactly what I'd do when I walked back out there, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this moment pass without claiming it. This was my restaurant, my life, and I was ready to start acting like it. But as I reached for the door, a flicker of doubt crept in. What if I faced him and crumbled? What if my courage faltered when it mattered most? I pushed the thought away, but it lingered, a quiet challenge. Could I find the strength to change my life? Or would I hesitate when it mattered most? The decision to act settled into me like a fire finding kindling. As I stepped back into the restaurant, the clatter of dishes and murmur of voices felt sharper, more vivid, as if my senses had been dialed up. Daniel and his new wife were still at their table, her head tilted back in laughter, his hand resting possessively on hers. I didn't flinch this time. Instead, I felt a quiet intensity building, a plan taking shape in my mind. This wasn't about losing control, it was about taking it back. Piece by calculated piece. I moved through the dining room. My smile practiced and professional, stopping to chat with a regular about the evening's specials. But my mind was elsewhere, weaving a strategy. I wasn't going to storm over to their table and make a scene that was too impulsive. Too much like the old Marie who let emotions rule. No, this had to be deliberate, something that would hit Daniel where it hurt most, his pride. He'd always cared about appearances, about being seen as the man in control. Tonight, I'd show him I was the one calling the shots. I slipped into the kitchen, where the chaos of sizzling pans and shouted orders felt like a safe haven. Lila, I called to my head server, a sharp-eyed woman who'd been with me since the bistro opened. She glanced up from plating a dessert, reading the look on my face instantly. "What's up, Marie?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "I need you to do me a favor," I said, keeping my voice low. Table 12. Make sure their service is flawless. I mean, beyond flawless. Complimentary wine, extra attention, the works. But don't let them know I'm behind it. Lila raised an eyebrow, catching the edge in my tone. She didn't know the full story, nobody here did, but she nodded, her lips curling into a knowing smile. Got it, boss. Next I pulled aside Marco, my sous chef, and asked him to prepare a special dessert for their table, something not on the menu, something exquisite. Make it unforgettable, I told him. He grinned, already reaching for the good chocolate. I wanted their meal to be perfect, not because I cared about their enjoyment, but because I wanted Daniel to feel the weight of my success. Every bite, every sip, would be a reminder that this was my domain. Back in the dining room, I positioned myself where I could watch without being noticed. Near the bar, where the shadows kept me out of sight, Lila was already at their table, pouring a glass of our best Pinot Noir, her charm dialed up to 11. Daniel looked pleased, leaning back in his chair like a king, oblivious to the fact that I was orchestrating every moment. His wife, Clara, I'd overheard a server call her, beamed, clearly delighted by the attention. I wondered if she'd still be smiling if she knew who was pulling the strings. The plan wasn't just about impressing them, it was about control. For years, Daniel had made me feel powerless, like my choices didn't matter. Tonight, I was rewriting that narrative. I'd serve them a meal they couldn't forget, in a space I'd built without him, and I'd do it without ever letting him know I was watching. But as I stood there, a part of me wondered what came next. Would this be enough? Would this subtle flex of power satisfy the anger simmering inside me, or was I building toward something bigger? I didn't have all the answers yet, but the plan felt right, like a chess move I'd been waiting years to make. As Lila returned with their empty plates, whispering that they'd raved about the food, I felt a surge of satisfaction. But it was fleeting. Revenge, I was starting to realize, was a tricky thing. Would it feel as victorious as I hoped when it was over, or would it leave me feeling empty? The restaurant felt alive, pulsing with the rhythm of clinking glasses and murmured conversations. But my focus was razor-sharp, locked on their table. Daniel and Clara were savoring the last of Marco's chocolate torte, their faces lit with satisfaction, oblivious to the storm I'd been brewing. My plan had unfolded perfectly so far: impeccable service, a flawless meal, every detail a silent declaration of my control. But it wasn't enough, not yet. I needed to face them, to step out of the shadows and make Daniel see me not the broken woman he'd left, but the one who'd built an empire in spite of him. I smoothed my apron, my heart pounding but steady, and made my way toward their table. Each step felt like a reclaiming of something he'd taken from me: my confidence, my sense of self. Lila caught my eye as I passed, her expression a mix of curiosity and encouragement. I gave her a slight nod, a signal that I was ready. Ready? For what? Exactly. I wasn't sure, but I knew I couldn't stay invisible any longer. Enjoying your evening? I asked as I reached their table, my voice calm but carrying an edge I couldn't quite hide. Daniel looked up, and for a split second, his smile faltered. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by something else. Surprise, maybe, or unease. Clara, oblivious, smiled brightly. "Oh, it's been wonderful," she said, her voice warm. "The food, the wine, everything's perfect." "I'm glad to hear that," I said, holding Daniel's gaze. "I'm Marie, the owner. I like to check in on our guests personally." The word owner landed like a stone in still water, rippling across his expression. Clara's smile widened, unaware of the undercurrent. "You own this place. It's amazing. We'll definitely be back." Daniel shifted in his seat, his hand tightening around his glass. "Marie," he said, his voice careful, like he was testing the weight of my name. "Didn't expect to see you here." The lie was so blatant it almost made me laugh. He knew this was my restaurant. He'd seen the articles, the reviews. He'd come here on purpose, hadn't he? To flaunt his new life, to remind me of what I'd lost. But he hadn't expected me to confront him, to stand here with my head high, claiming my space. I could say the same, I replied, my tone cool but deliberate. "But I'm glad you're enjoying the meal." "It's been a labor of love." I let the words hang, letting him feel the weight of what I'd built without him. Clara, still clueless, chimed in about the dessert, asking for the recipe. I smiled, deflecting with a vague promise to share it someday. But my eyes never left Daniel's. He knew this wasn't just about dessert. The moment stretched, taut with unspoken history. I could have pushed further, called him out, exposed the cracks in his perfect facade, but I didn't. Not yet. This wasn't about humiliating him in front of Clara. It was about showing him I wasn't invisible anymore. I excused myself with a polite nod, leaving them to their evening, but as I walked away, I felt his eyes on me, heavy with something I couldn't quite name. Regret. Resentment. It didn't matter. Back at the bar, I exhaled, my hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline. I'd done it. I'd faced him, and I hadn't crumbled, but as the high of the moment faded, a new question settled in. I'd executed my plan, reclaimed my space. But would this confrontation bring the relief I'd hoped for, or would it leave me questioning everything? The restaurant's hum faded into a dull roar as I leaned against the bar, the adrenaline from confronting Daniel still pulsing through me. I'd done it. Tide stood in front of him, claimed my space, and walked away without crumbling, but as the moment settled, a strange hollowness crept in, like the quiet after a storm. I'd expected triumph, a rush of victory that would erase the years of pain. Instead, I felt a tangle of emotions: relief, yes, but also doubt, anger, and something heavier I couldn't name. Had I really won, or had I just opened a door to more questions? I busied myself with wiping down the bar, my hands moving on autopilot while my mind replayed the confrontation. Daniel's faltering smile, the way his eyes had darted away when I said I was the owner. It was satisfying, but not in the way I'd imagined. I'd wanted him to feel small, to see the weight of what he'd lost. But his discomfort hadn't filled the ache in my chest. If anything, it had sharpened it, reminding me of all the ways his betrayal had shaped me, even now. In this place I'd built to escape it. Leela slid up beside me, her voice low. "You okay, Marie?" That was intense. She'd seen the exchange, or at least enough to know something was off. I managed a small smile, not ready to spill the whole story. "I'm fine," I said, but the words felt thin. She didn't push, just squeezed my shoulder and moved on to clear a table. I was grateful. For her silence, it gave me space to think, to sort through the mess of feelings swirling inside me. I slipped into the back office, needing a moment away from the dining room's buzz. The photo of opening night stared back at me from the desk, my younger self beaming with pride. That Marie had been so sure this restaurant would be her salvation, her way of proving she was enough. But tonight, facing Daniel, I'd realized something. This place, this success, wasn't enough to heal the wounds he'd left. The scars weren't just about him, they were about me, about the parts of myself I'd buried to survive. I sank into the chair, my fingers tracing the edge of the desk. I'd spent years running from those scars, building walls around my heart to keep the pain out, but confronting Daniel had cracked those walls, letting the hurt flood back in. I thought of the nights I'd spent questioning what I'd done wrong, why I wasn't enough for him to stay. I thought of the dreams I'd let go of, not just the restaurant, but the smaller ones. Like trusting someone new, like believing I deserved more than survival. Was revenge supposed to feel like this? I'd orchestrated the perfect evening, served them a meal that screamed my success, and faced Daniel with a strength I didn't know I had. But instead of closure, I felt raw, exposed, like I'd ripped open a wound I'd only bandaged before. I wanted to believe I'd taken back my power. But a quiet voice in my head wondered if I'd just been chasing his shadow all along. As I sat there, staring at the photo, I realized the real battle wasn't with Daniel, it was with myself. I'd confronted him, but could I confront the parts of me that still felt broken? Had revenge truly healed my wounds, or was there something deeper I needed to face?